Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of family and children's discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
Hey, Ben, how you doing today, brother?
Doing pretty well, I guess, considering the circumstances. You know, we talked about before how quarantined at home. Thankfully, my wife's on the mend, but we are thankful that people have shown us kindness, brought us food. My kids are very happy that I didn't have to make something from scratch, and I got some yummy stuff. So how about you?
I'm doing pretty well, other than for me, just a little disappointed Tom Brady is back in the Super Bowl. We have some international listeners, and I'm sure that's not really relevant to you, but here in the United States, I think we just get exhausted having the same thing over and over again.
Tom Brady's going to be going out there with his cane before long.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. So, you know, I don't think when people ask for life coming back to normal, that's what people meant. So, anyway, so.
Well, you know, given the options, Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady, it was hard to pick. You know, it's kind of like with other contests, like if both options could lose, you know, that would be preferable, but it's not the way it works. So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, we talked about, a distinguished man that's done some great work. And for our listeners, you know, they might know our guest today a little bit better than Tom Brady, perhaps, or maybe less so, depending on how long they've listened to our podcast. So we've got a return guest again today, talking about something pretty different from what we talked to him about last year. So returning to our podcast today is Simon Camilleri, and we were blessed to have him on to talk about abortion today. Last time we talked with him about a really, really great book, When Santa Learned the Gospel. And we wanted to kind of hear his thoughts, as he does a lot of great work in addressing abortion among the many, many things he does alongside his day job in Australia. So welcome to the podcast, Simon.
It's great to be here. Good to be back.
Thank you.
Yes, we're good. We have quite a shift though from Santa Claus to abortion, and I mean, obviously we're not talking. Simon's not an abortion advocate, but you do cover the waterfront, I guess, on the range of topics that you address. But we're glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
A man of many talents. So, well, Simon, what have you been up to since last we talked? Perhaps rapping a little bit, maybe? I'm not sure about that.
I don't know how much that hit the States, but I wrote, for your listeners that don't know, I wrote a parody song of the opening song from Hamilton and put that together for Christmas, and did that just for my own church's Christmas Carols event, which was online, and it was the sort of the opening number. And instead of it being about Alexander Hamilton, it was about Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And it went really well, and then I just posted it on my own Facebook, and that started getting shared everywhere. And it got to about 750,000 views, and churches showing it at their Christmas services and on Christmas Eve, and a whole bunch of things like that, which was very hilarious to sort of witness something like that. I don't know if you'd really call that number viral, but it was definitely, it was fun to see places in the US and Canada and England also watching it and sharing it and things like that. So that was fun. And probably the biggest creative thing I was part of was a reading, an epic reading or dramatic reading of the entire book of Job, which we put together in the middle of sort of at the start of the pandemic last year. And me and 8 other actors all got together on Zoom and performed, each playing a different character from the book, and read it from word to word, word for word, from beginning to end. And it was about a 3-hour performance. And that was just a wonderful thing to be part of. So I am often involved in quite a variety of creative pursuits on the side. So, and then probably in terms of on the topic of abortion, we had a very big. I'm part of a group called March for the Babies, and we had to turn our usual march, which is in the streets of Melbourne, to an online event, which required a lot more graphic design and and video editing, and that's some of my skills. And so I was able to really help out this year and be part of that, and that was really wonderful as well.
Praise the Lord.
Brother, you are a busy man.
Yeah.
That's. I didn't know about some of those other. I knew that you did theatrical things. We're very gifted that way. What character was yours in the Job reading?
I played Job. So
okay.
I shaved my head for the performance, and I had the joy and the sorrow, I guess, of performing this, and we tried to really not hold back in terms of, it's a very emotional piece, and what he goes through is very emotional, and so we didn't want to sugarcoat it or anything like that. So it was really a very powerful thing to be a part of.
I have to check that out. In America, we've noticed, or at least I've seen this, where films that are made about biblical times, they always have British accents. I don't know why that is. So I guess you and your friends take a little different spin on it, but
That's right. Although the lady who played Satan, she was American. So there you go. That seemed to work for us Australians.
We are the great Satan. So
no. It was great. We had a variety of voices, and but yeah, people might get a kick out of hearing an Aussie Job. Who knows?
Very good. Yeah, I want to check that out. Well, so you mentioned some of your pro-life work and how you were able to contribute. So tell us just in general, how are you involved in pro-life causes in Australia?
I think probably in terms of a practical way, the biggest sort of way is being involved in March for the Babies. And March for the Babies is the biggest pro-life event that happens in our state. I'm not sure, it may be the biggest that happens in Australia, but I don't know the numbers there. But we often get, and this is sort of pales in comparisons to some of the pro-life marches you get in the States, but due to our sort of population difference, we get about 7,000 people walking the streets of Melbourne, and it's a really joyous event, and it's done to protest the laws that were brought in about 11 years ago in Victoria, which were landmarked some of the most extreme laws in the world. And slowly over that time, other states in Australia have followed suit. So it's sort of there to mark that day, and also to to speak out our protest about that, and to gather together the various little pro-life organisations that are around, and help us gather together as one voice on that one day. And apart from that, I love. I care a lot about this issue and engage with it on social media and write about it now and then and speak to people about it. I've always loved thinking about how to formulate a good argument for something and being honest about both sides of an argument. And so I really value having discussions with people who are pro-choice, who are willing to have good discussions about it, and reaching out to the other side as well. So, and having those sort of dialogues to try and, so we're not just talking over each other. And so, just trying to keep that conversation going online and help change happen, not just from a legal perspective, but from a social one as well.
That's good. So,
Very good.
by the way, I want to say that, I've seen some of your interaction, even on, the social media, with some who disagreed. And I really respect how, you always come across very civil and respectful of those you disagree in all of these kind of areas, which is one of the reasons why I thought it would be great to talk to you on this, because I think there can be a lot of pigeonholing sometimes, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Well, one of the people who really modeled that for me is an American pro-life advocate called Josh Brahms. I think Brahm is his Brahm. And he runs the Equal Rights Institute. If your listeners can look up him, because he's him and his ministry is basically about, especially with on campus ministries, they help people have good conversations about the topic of abortion. And I just really respect his philosophy of not straw manning, not, painting your opponent just in the worst light so you can tear them down, how to actually have genuine conversations that can be productive and healthy. And so, yeah, it's been good. And it's taken me a long time to learn how to do that, I think.
That's good. So, now, why are you so passionate about this specific issue of abortion?
It's an interesting question. Partly I'm passionate because it's an important issue, and I don't see a lot of people being passionate about it in my circles. So in Australia, getting people to think about this topic is actually harder. A lot of people just don't get too involved in big issues. We're all pretty relaxed in Australia, and so getting Christians interested about a specific social issue is sometimes hard. And so I felt like there was a place to look into this and speak and be a part of this, the little movement that that is happening. Even the March for the Babies Committee, even though we get thousands and thousands of people coming, it's only a very small team, and so it's a privilege to be a part of that small team. But I'm passionate about lots of things. So the genesis of what really got me thinking I need to, I really do believe this. I really do believe abortion is wrong and that we need to address it. Started when I just sort of went along to the March for the Babies protests back in 2014. And that morning, my wife and I had just learnt from the doctor that we were pregnant, or that she was pregnant. So it was funny. We got the confirmation from the doctor, yes, you are pregnant. And then we went to a pro-life march together. And there was something really special and beautiful about that, realizing this child does exist and has humanity even at this tiny, tiny stage, and that we really believe that. And we began talking. We made sure that the language we used was true to that. So we didn't say, that this child, we're looking forward to having a child or looking forward to being a father, that I was a father there and then.
Yeah.
And also in that very early stage, all parents know that there's the fear of there being a miscarriage in the first few weeks. And so you don't tell lots of people and things like that. So, and that fear, because it was our first child, was quite oppressive. You sort of, and we'd been trying to have a child for years, for a couple of years. And so one of the things we had to remember was that this child is here now. And we don't know how long this child will be here, but we should praise God for it and enjoy it in the here and now, not just be afraid of what might come. And that, I think, solidified this real mindset for us. And amazingly, then a year later, when we were back at the march, we were there with our child, and have taken her to the marches from then on, year after year. And So I think that's partly was the genesis of what made me realize, yes, I really do believe this. I really do believe that a child is a child from the point of conception, and that the apathy that is in Australia about this issue, both from Christians and especially from the wider society, is something that needs to be combated, and we need to, And so I felt like I had a place to speak into it and start those conversations.
That's encouraging to hear. And this is a short aside. If you can answer this briefly, then feel free. If it's, I guess, too complicated, then we can just move on. But, in America, the abortion conversation really goes along political fault lines. Is it the same way in Australia, or is it just a different context?
It is, in that one side of politics is very much like the Democratic platform, the Democrats' platform, in terms of very, very comfortable with abortion and seeing it as a right up until birth, and have passed laws to that effect in many states. We have more than a two-party system, so we have quite influential third parties. They're nowhere near as big, but they are influential. And there's one called the Greens that is very progressive, and another one that's called the Reason Party and they push this issue very and have a lot of influence to do so. Our more conservative party is in no way a flag-waving pro-life movement at all. They're fairly flip-floppy, and they don't stand up and say anything very clearly. There is definitely people in that party who would, and probably the only ones that do stand up generally come from that party. Yeah, they are generally from that party, but it's pretty hard to get politicians to stand up and put their neck out and say, we are pro-life and we believe this. I see that much more in the States. And so because of that, it's actually just, it's feeling like the tide is very much politically not in our favor.
I see. Yeah, and in America, it's not uniformly, but largely goes along, more the bigger picture political divide. So it's obviously a political issue, but is it also a theological issue?
Yes. Especially because all of life is a theological issue to some degree. Like work is a theological issue, and God cares about not just what we believe about God, but also how we treat his creation and how we treat each other. It's definitely a theological issue because the theology of what makes something a human is wrapped up in the issue of abortion, and how we should treat humans is a theological issue, I guess, and how we treat humans relating to how we treat God as humans being made in God's image. So I do think, it shouldn't be separated as there's a secular issue and then there's theological issues. If it relates to potentially how we treat people, in both mothers and babies, then I think it is on that level a theological issue, an issue that God cares about.
Yeah, that was well said, just in a real concise way. That obviously maybe legislation about it can get into the issue of wisdom and sound judgment and that kind of thing, whereas taxation is a whole different, more steps removed, but this gets into the core of what it means to be made in God's image. And so
now,
agree with you.
As with all theological issues, the most important thing is really how the Bible addresses it. So what does the Bible actually say about abortion, Simon, or does it say anything at all?
Yeah, it was a great question to think about. And you could almost do several podcasts just unpacking just that question. And so I was thinking about it because some people say the Bible says nothing about abortion, and I don't think it does. There is one case in the Bible where it where it very specifically talks about abortion, but it's in an obscure way. In Jeremiah 20, verse 17, where Jeremiah wishes he was aborted. So that's not necessarily on topic exactly, but where he wishes he was killed in the womb, but, out of despair. It seems like a very Old Testament thing to just wish you never existed at times of lament. But one thing that passage does show is that he thinks of himself as an eye in the womb, and that you could kill him in the womb. So he talks about it in that way. I think the things that the general things, if I can try and summarize it simply, that the Bible says about abortion is it definitely affirms the biggest idea, I think, is it affirms that all humans are made in the image of God, that all humans bear God's image, have the role of displaying his image to the world, have that dignity and worth and value, and should be treated as such. And it distincts humanity from all other creatures, and how we treat humans as different to how we treat other creatures. And the Bible does say that it's because we're made in the image of God, that's what makes murder wrong. Genesis 9:6 is, that's why it's the death penalty for murder, because man is made in God's image. And you get that also in James chapter 3, verse 9, this idea that how can you praise God with sort of one side of your mouth and curse people who are made in God's image? That there's a hypocrisy of how we treat people who are made in God's image reflects how we treat God. And so humanity, that's, I think, one of the big things is humans are made in God's image and therefore should be loved and treated with dignity and value. And then the big question is the life in the womb a human being? And for some people, that's the big line in the sand, of one way or the other. And so, I think the Bible assumes that they are. I think the language, whenever of a life in the womb, it's never talked about what defines a human is suddenly when they're born, they become a human being. The passage, when I'm trying to explain this to someone, I often go to is Luke 1 and Luke 2. And in Luke 1, you've got the story of Elizabeth, pregnant, and the baby in her womb leaps for joy. And then in Luke 2, you've got the angel saying to the shepherds, you will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. The word that is used for when the baby in my womb leapt for joy and you will find a baby wrapped in cloths is the exact same word. The Bible doesn't have a different word for a child in the womb and a child out of the womb. It's the same word, same concept. And Psalm 139 is one that people know very well, and especially verses 13 to 16 is where it talks about God knitting us in the womb and putting us together, and God being intimately involved with us and knowing us, even in that place where we're being put together. So I think the Bible affirms definitely that we are us even in the womb. There's lots more, there's lots of other arguments to support that as well, but so I definitely think that the prohibition or the command to not murder applies to children in the womb, and there's never a place where that's not taken seriously. So the death of a child in the womb, even when it happens naturally through a miscarriage, it's always treated quite very seriously and is a tragic thing. So I think the case is made that abortion is a sin, is a terrible thing to do, and is a destruction of a life that is made in God's image. But I don't think the Bible stops there, and I think sadly maybe that's what people hear Christians just saying. This is the Christian position on abortion and the Bible's position on abortion. I think the other element that we need to also include is that Jesus came into the world to save sinners. So as much as it is a terrible thing, God doesn't leave us just holding on to our terrible things. He's, the great message of the good news is that Jesus came to save all of us who need forgiveness. And the sin of abortion is not something that should leave people in despair, but that they can find healing and hope and forgiveness for. So that's a very brief summary, and I want to write more on what the Bible says on a whole range of issues surrounding abortion. But yeah, there's a little summary.
That's
helpful.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. I just want to say, especially, I liked you pointing out something I really hadn't brought up in this, is the language in Luke 1 and 2, and how helpful that is, to navigate what the Bible ever even thought about as the difference between a child inside or outside the womb, which really is that there isn't.
Deuteronomy also imposes stricter judgment on if a woman is struck while she's pregnant. It causes the child to die. And even contemporary law in countries where there's abortion sometimes sort of nods that, yes, that is a human. You can get charged for double homicide if you kill a mother and a baby.
I've always been fascinated by that in the States. And I've seen that in the States where there's some states that if you hit, if there's an accident and the baby dies, then you can be up for double homicide or where, and in states where you can, if the mother chooses to kill the child, then that's allowed. Australia is much more consistent than your country. Whenever those laws have been brought to the table, and some have said there needs to be a law because, like, there's been women who've been hit by it. There was one case, I think, where a woman was hit by a drunk driver and lost her late pregnancy child, and they tried to bring about a law in honour of her, and the argument against it was, if we did this, then that would be a slippery slope to preventing abortion. So I heard the commentary specifically saying, well, if we start saying that it's a human being and that sort of stuff, then what will be our argument against abortion? And so they were consistent in that, going, we can't acknowledge that a human being has died. And, and so one of the weird things that's happened in Victoria just recently, which is a first sign of maybe hopefully a crack in that, is that you can now apply for a proper either birth certificate or a death certificate or something official if you have a miscarriage, to honour the child, and so but it feels like this state that's so progressive and so does not want to acknowledge any rights for the child then gives this sort of dignity to it through in the case of miscarriage. So there is a bit of hypocrisy there.
It's an interesting feature of society. Well, I think all of us would agree that people of both genders, one, that there are two genders, and that they should be treated with equal dignity. But isn't being pro-life sort of being against treating genders with equal dignity?
Yeah, it's often portrayed that the pro-life position is anti-women, or that it's against women's rights, and obviously that argument falls down when you realise there's more pro-life women than there are pro-life men. That the pro-life movement is, there's a bigger percentage of them that are women. But I actually think Christians don't, or pro-life people, let's just say across the board, don't acknowledge that this is actually a real, genuine driving force behind the pro-choice movement that is a valid one to take into consideration. That historically, the fact that women could get... there were two big sort of things that freed up women to pursue their dreams and careers and things like that. And one of them was the development of menstrual products that allowed them not to have to not do things, have to hide away when they're on their menstruation on that time of the month. And that sort of freed them up to be able to go out and about. And two, was abortion. which freed them up to continue a career, continue education, and not have to take that time out. And as much as that sounds like a very cold argument, it's still a very real reality. And it is true that if there's a man and a woman and they have sex and the woman gets pregnant, the man terribly can just run away and live his life however he wants. And often and I've heard the argument that for there to be true gender equality, then women need to have that same freedom. And unless women have that same freedom to not bear the consequences of an unwanted pregnancy, then men and women will always get the short end of the stick. And that's that's a cold argument, but it is actually an argument that is true in that sense. And it's an argument that we need to address. Like, we actually need to make sure that women don't get the short end of the stick if they experience an unwanted pregnancy, that they're not left destitute, that they're not left in a position where they think abortion is the only option for them. And the other big thing we need to do is hold men accountable. The idea that to be equal, women have to be as much of a dirtbag as those guys who would abandon their women is, I don't want to hold up those men and go, yeah, they have so much freedom. Isn't that wonderful? We should try and level the playing field. I'd rather go, actually, the thing that needs to change is men need to take their responsibility seriously. And we need to provide, I think as a society, we need to provide for women who face unwanted pregnancy, especially in cases where it was less of their own fault, not just through rape, but maybe through them being young and foolish and that sort of things. And that society needs to provide to make options other than abortion a possibility.
That's helpful. So, I just want to add to that. It fascinates me in navigating this, and I think you bring up some really good points, but it's strange how this mentality that, being pro-life is being anti-woman just utterly ignores the positions of, especially in America, the original suffragettes. And I don't know if you know, because obviously a different country, but, most of our original suffragettes were almost universally strongly pro-life. You had Susan B. Anthony, you have Alice Paul. Alice Paul, equated it with murder. And I was actually watching a Saturday Night Live skit a couple of years ago that actually acknowledged it. I was going through her home, and it was almost like a dismissive of making fun of, she lived back in that time, but we almost dismiss it through this kind of chronological snobbery and ironically sexistly, act as if, these super intelligent women are inferior to the modern men that wrote sketches like that. TFM listeners, this has been part one of a two-part interview discussion with Simon Camilleri about abortion and the Christian's response. For the second half of this discussion, please tune in for our next episode coming up mid-February, in which we will talk about some of the specifics and how we can respond and how we can raise up children that are consistently pro-life. Thank you for joining us. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Theological Family Ministry Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your friends on social media. All new episodes are available to listen to on Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spreaker, and iTunes. We hope you have a great week, and join us again every first and third Thursday.